All right, it's happening. Good morning, Low Carb Canberra. Very big welcome to everybody on behalf of Tracy, Kimberly and myself, Liz Fraser. Thank you for joining us. And if you have any technical glitches, you can email us on admin@lowcarbcanberra.com.au. So Low Carb Canberra is a community organisation. We are providing information, inspiration, community and support to people who are doing low carb, carnivore, keto, and especially those who are starting out, but also people anywhere on the journey. Thank you. And welcome to our 2020 conference. It's online, it's interactive. We have a variety of formats. We have some formal talks, we have some panel sessions, there'll be a chat session coming up a bit later. We're featuring local speakers, people who live and work in the low carb universe in the Canberra region, and a couple of people from Sydney and Melbourne. Guys, it's not flicking over.
It's not flicking over. Can you take a look at that?
So, for example, some of our local speakers, we have Tara Whelan, who's a diabetes educator, pharmacist, and a woman living with type 1 diabetes. We have Richard Morris coming up shortly. Many of you will be familiar with Richard Morris, founder of the Two Keto Dudes podcast, and now studying honours in biochemistry at that funny little university down the road, ANU. We have Jessica Turton. Jessica is a fabulous dietitian from Sydney. She's actually going to be with us here in Canberra today. We will have Dr. Mel Deary, local GP, who also has been practicing in the low carb space for a while. Our themes, going to have a quick talk about our themes, questions, controversies, community and creating change. So one of the things we would like to do is give people the opportunity to ask questions. There will be interactive panels. You can put in your questions and somebody will take note of them. Later on today, we have a question and answer panel where we will attempt to answer some of those questions. Controversies. We know that, hi Jess, hi Tom. We know that low carb attracts a lot of controversy. The conventional mainstream approach thinks that low carb is pretty crazy. We know that the conventional approach doesn't work for many people, but also within the low carb community, there's plenty of controversy, and Richard Morris is going to address some of those controversies for us. Things like should people be carb cycling and fat versus protein. A bit later on, we have Peter Bruckner, the sports physician from Melbourne, and he's going to talk about running on fat. Can athletes successfully compete if they're fat fueled? So we know that even within our community, we're not homogenous. There's a spectrum from relaxed low carb through to, which is like 50, maybe 50 to 100 grams of carbohydrate a day, to keto, to carnivore, which is zero carb. When Tracy and I were fishing around for a name for this organisation, we specifically selected Low Carb Canberra and not Keto Canberra or Carnivore Canberra, because we wanted to embrace the diversity of this community. And we encourage people to find a level of carbohydrate consumption that suits their individual physiological and situational requirements. So we're trying to explore some of the debates, including about how local people fit a low carb lifestyle into family life. So the next two, community and creating change, I think are very closely intertwined, because we know that it's hard doing it on your own, and it's much easier if you're surrounded by people with similar goals and values. So that was one of the things that, one of the goals Tracy and I had in mind when we set up Low Carb Canberra, was to foster a supportive community to help people on their low carb journey and to create change. So for example, somebody that I met recently has been doing low carb pretty much on her own for a couple of years, now heading down the carnivore path. But she reported that her social circle was largely vegetarian and vegan, and that sounded pretty socially awkward. So I think that's one of the reasons why having a low carb community is important. For example, at our 2019 Low Carb Canberra Christmas party, it was a pretty ordinary event, just a bunch of people, bring a plate to share, gathered around a picnic table in the park, pretty much what you do in Canberra in December. Somebody there commented that what they really liked about it was that they knew that everything that was on the table was something that they could enjoy, and they didn't have to worry about whether it was full of sugar or starch. So we're about creating change, both community change and personal change. And I think Low Carb Canberra's, the conference and the organisation is about building the revolution from the ground up. Some people find it easier, some people find it more difficult. I'm a doctor. I saw a lady a few years ago, diagnosed her diabetes, HbA1c of 6.6. I gave her the talk for half an hour. She went off, had a blood test 4 months later. Her HbA1c had dropped from 6.6 down to 5.7. And she felt great and she was very happy. And I said to her, so how did you do it? And she said, I went keto. And I kind of looked at her and said, so how did you manage to go keto? She said, I bought a recipe book. And that was all she had to do. She was pretty much on her own. She could cook. All she needed was a bit of inspiration and off she went. But we know that for many people, it's actually a lot harder than that. And some of the big questions that we hear from people is, what do I eat if I'm not having cereal for breakfast? What do I eat if I don't have a sandwich at lunchtime? What do I eat if I can't have pasta, rice or potato? So we're here to tell you some of those answer some of those really basic questions. What do you eat? We know that many people need support to change, and we're specifically addressing change. Michelle Austin later today, she's a change psychologist, and she'll be talking about why it's so difficult to change. And my co-convener Tracy Kimberley is a health coach, and she'll share some of her practical experience coaching people towards change. So what I'd like to do now is just explore the concept of perspective. What we're exploring in this conference is a series of ideas and perspectives, and embedded in the concept of perspective is that you can get a different view, or your view of something depends on where you stand and how you look, so the eyes that you're using. Changing the eyes that you're using and where you stand will give you a different view. What we're encouraging you to do is use different eyes, more eyes, to get a more complete way of seeing. Now, we know that in science there are some incontrovertible truths, like if you eat a lot of carbohydrate and you have an intact pancreas, you will produce a lot of insulin, and over the time that will produce hyperinsulinemia. I'm going to explore this idea of different eyes using different lenses with the analogy from radiology. So radiology, medical imaging, has different ways of seeing, for example, X-rays, CT scans, MRIs, ultrasounds. So there's a chest X-ray on the little image on the left, and there's a CT scan of the chest. They're looking at the same thing, but they're giving us different information. And there's an MRI. So you can be looking at the same thing, but see different things. A way of seeing is also a way of not seeing. So with perspective, two people can be looking at pretty much the same thing and see actually different things. So what we're trying to do with this weekend is explore different understandings and how these can help us make changes in our lives. We're not going to agree on everything that's presented this weekend, and Inspector Harry Callaghan is reminding us here about opinions. We all know what he said about opinions. We encourage your opinion to be informed. Often there may not be a single answer and there may not be a right way. We encourage you to be well informed and to experiment with what works for you. So Low Carb Canberra is a forum for a range of ideas about low carbohydrate approaches, and we're here to help you obtain that support and inspiration, because this is how we strengthen this community. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Richard Morris.